A late-night train ride turns into a chilling ordeal when a passenger overhears a confession of a dark crime. As the mystery unfolds, he becomes entangled in a dangerous situation, forced to decide whether to act or stay silent.
There is a period in life when your patience is at its limit. When you are irritated by absolutely everything that happens. You have no desires, you are simply burned out. Very tired and do not want anything. I am going through such a period right now. In the last few months, my life, despite its stability, began to resemble a kind of chain of unnecessary events, repeating day after day. There was a lot of work, so much that at some point I stopped understanding why I even go to work, because I no longer have time for anything. Something inside me began to fade. I felt trapped. The office, home, meaningless conversations with colleagues about how tired we all are, and again workdays filled with eternal projects and deadlines. I felt that my life had reached a dead end, and I needed to do something radical to break out of this vicious circle. I was hatching the idea of quitting my job and going to travel the world for the next year. I already had enough savings, no family, what's holding me back? And so this day came yesterday. The plan was this. I quit my job, go to my hometown to see my family, spend the weekend with them, and from there the start of my new life begins. From there I will begin my journey, from a place of power. Very symbolic. This makes it even funnier that it was yesterday evening that this story happened, when I was very symbolically going to start my life anew. I spent the whole day sorting out the last issues at work, and at night, I already had train tickets. This train was supposed to be the first step towards change. Of course, I didn't expect that the trip would turn into something much more important than just a flight into the unknown. But perhaps I myself was subconsciously looking for something, that very turning point that would change everything. The train was not the most modern, but I liked its atmosphere: old chairs, the smell of wood and iron, the lulling sound of the wheels. I sat down by the window, tried to get comfortable, and then took out a book. However, before I could get into the reading, I was distracted by a conversation. The first woman's voice was quiet, but her anxiety was obvious. Her words awakened that very instinct in me: curiosity. Why was this so important to me? Why couldn't I just sit and read like I usually did? I decided to put the book aside and listen. At that moment, it seemed to me that the conversation of these people was unimportant, and I could ignore them. But apparently something in this conversation strongly attracted me. I couldn't understand what exactly, but what they were discussing was not accidental. Finding myself on the edge of two worlds, the ordinary, familiar world and what was hidden behind their every word, I felt my soul grow cold. "Are you sure he won't bother me anymore?" asked the second interlocutor. I don't know what to do. He was following me the whole time. I don't even remember how it happened. He just ended up there, and I didn't kill him. He fell on his own. I didn't have time. The woman's voice was shaking, her words sounding extremely awkward. My heart almost stopped, as if someone had whispered something terrible in my ear that I shouldn't have heard. I couldn't understand who these people were or what was happening, but I was filled with a strange mixture of fear and interest. "Do you want to leave all of this in the past?" the second voice asked. Its tone was cold, as if it knew that something serious was at stake. I can't just leave him, I can't. But if someone finds out that I could lose everything. You know what will happen to us if someone finds out. My head was seething with thoughts. On this quiet, peaceful train ride, I suddenly found myself part of something dark, something that could change my life forever. I didn't know whether to intervene or remain silent. I was so close to this conversation that I heard every word, and I couldn't understand why they decided to discuss this right here on this train. On the one hand, it's none of my business, right? I thought about calling the conductor, but what would I tell him? I had no evidence. My heart was beating faster. My breathing became ragged. I wondered what to do as the train sped into the dark night, and only dim lights flickered outside the window. I restrained myself, but the fear became unbearable. The two people continued their conversation without noticing me, and I finally realized what I had to do. I took out my phone and took a few quick steps towards the exit, trying to attract as little attention as possible. My hand nervously dialed the police number. Hello, I overheard a conversation on the train, and I think something terrible has happened. I don't know who these people are, but they are discussing some kind of crime. I can't leave it like this. The train slowed down, and I felt something inside me respond. We were approaching some station, dark and empty. The carriage I was sitting in was almost empty, except for a couple of people sitting at the far end. But I couldn't hear their voices anymore. At some point, the silence became almost unbearable, as if the whole world had frozen, waiting for what would happen next. I sat there, nervously fiddling with the phone in my hands. The police asked me to stay on the line, and I still couldn't figure out what to do. I wasn't sure if they would hear me in time, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. If these people did what they said they did, they had to be caught. When the train finally stopped at the station, I heard the door open. I quickly stood up and looked out into the corridor, trying to spot the people who might have been part of that horrible conversation. I saw their shadows as they quickly headed for the exit, and before I could even think, I decided, I have to follow them. My hand froze on the phone, but looking towards the carriage doors, I realized that the only way to find out what was going on was to follow them out. I slowly stood up and, trying not to attract attention to myself, left the carriage, following the two figures in the darkness. The station was almost empty, and if it weren't for the weak light from the street lamps, I would not have seen anything in this emptiness. I followed them at a distance, trying not to show myself and not to attract attention. The people walked confidently, without looking back, as if this was their everyday life. I continued to watch them, feeling how anxiety squeezed my chest more and more. We left the station building, and I remember the thought flashing through my head that I was just crazy. Why was I butting into something that wasn't my business? Why did I go out after them? It was the police's job to follow them and find them. What did I have to do with it? But the deed was already done. What was the point of scolding myself when I was already on the heels of possible criminals at night? God, it even sounded crazy. I decided to keep to the shadows. An unusually quiet night, only the sounds of footsteps on the asphalt and the occasional echoes of trains passing on the nearby tracks. I felt the air become colder and adrenaline began to circulate through my veins. When we came out onto a small road surrounded by dark buildings, their steps became a little faster. At some point, they stopped at the entrance of an old brick house. I stood to the side, watching as one of them soon took out his keys and opened the door. The second man stood a little further away, looking around. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get closer, but I knew it might be too risky. While I was thinking, one of them, the one who seemed calm, slowly turned and stepped into the dark entrance. I stood not far from the entrance, feeling the air getting colder and thicker. My gaze could not tear itself away from the door through which the two had disappeared. The dark windows of the building gave no sign of life, and everything around seemed trapped in the night. Adrenaline boiled in my veins, but I could not retreat. I knew that I had to act. I squeezed the phone in my hand and made a decision. I needed to get closer. I needed to find out what kind of place they had chosen for their hideout. I took one step at a time, trying to move silently so as not to attract attention. Each movement was calculated. The building looked old, cracked, with peeling paint. There was a sign with the house number nearby. As soon as I approached the wall, hiding in the shadows, I could see the address. There were several numbers engraved on the metal plate. I quickly memorized them and wrote them down on my phone. This was important. The more accurate the information, the faster the police could act. I looked towards the door again. There were no sounds and everything was in its place. They had probably already managed to go inside. But I couldn't be sure. I was trying to figure out what to do next, how not to fall into their trap. The police were nearby, and I couldn't afford to miss this chance. I quickly returned to the shadows to hide from possible sight. My fingers trembled slightly, but I dialed the police number, whispering into the phone again, trying to remain calm. I see the address. It's a house on the street, number 47, yes, 47. It's an old building, 2 stories. I can't get in, but it looks like they're already there. I tried to speak as quietly as possible, trying not to let anyone overhear my words. The other end of the line answered with considerable excitement. Okay, I understand. We're on our way. Please wait a few minutes. Try to stay safe. I stood in the darkness, pressed against the brick wall of the house. My heart was beating faster, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I had to wait. On the other hand, the thought kept running through my head, what if I was wrong? Didn't understand something, didn't hear it. What if they were an ordinary couple, just got home and were now having dinner and going to bed? Several agonizing minutes passed, but eventually I heard the sound of approaching cars. My heart sank when I saw the police cars pulling up to the building. I quickly stood up and stepped towards the road, out of sight but not losing track of the situation. The police immediately took control of the situation. Several officers quickly ran out of their cars and headed towards the building. I stood nearby holding my breath. One of the officers approached me. "Are you Sam?" he asked. I nodded, still feeling my body tense as if I had become part of this operation. "Yes, I am. I overheard their conversation on the train. They are hiding something, and it seems I am the one who can help." The policeman nodded and passed the command to the other officers. The whole group headed towards the entrance of the building, ready for action. The minutes dragged on. I watched the police disappear into the darkness, preparing for a possible confrontation. I still couldn't believe that I was here, that just an ordinary train and an overheard confession led to this moment. A few minutes later, one of the police officers returned, his face tense. "Not only were they acting suspicious," he said, "but we found something in their apartment. We can't divulge the details, but your information was accurate. Thank you for your help. They said I could go now, but they were calling me to the station for questioning tomorrow. I would have to remember and tell them everything I saw and heard on the train. I'm sitting in my parents' house now. It's 8 a.m. I just got there because I was waiting for another train. Today I have to go to the police station to give a statement. This is how my new life as an unemployed person began. This is the kind of unusual night I experienced on the day I decided to start my life anew. Now I'm sitting here wondering if this is a good or a bad sign.